I drained my life savings to pay for my son's country club wedding. 14 months later, he handed his wealthy mother-in-law a $15,000 luxury cruise and slid a $2 scratch-off ticket across the table to me. He told me to try my luck. Tomorrow, he will learn exactly how lucky I got and how much his greed just cost him. $135 million to be exact. The private dining room at the Oak Room Steakhouse smelled of roasted garlic and expensive ambition. I was seated at the far end of the long mahogany table exactly 2 inches from the service door, where the waiters pushed past with heavy trays. It was a joint celebration for Mother's Day and Father's Day, orchestrated entirely by my daughter-in-law, Chloe. At the head of the table sat her mother, Patricia. Patricia was a woman who treated every social gathering like a personal coronation. She wore a tailored silk dress that easily cost more than my first car. I wore a navy blue blouse I bought on sale 5 years ago. My name is Evelyn Hayes. I spent 38 years working as a municipal accounts manager for the city. I know how to balance a budget down to the last penny, and I know how to spot a deficit. The deficit in this room had nothing to do with money. It had to do with respect. My son Liam stood up, tapping his crystal water glass with a silver spoon. He was 34 years old, wearing a suit I did not recognize, carrying himself with a practiced ease that looked borrowed rather than earned. He smiled down at Patricia. He told the room how much he appreciated everything she did for the family, how she set the standard for elegance, how she had welcomed him into her world. Then he reached behind his chair and produced a large box wrapped in heavy gold paper with a thick satin bow. He placed it directly in front of Patricia. She feigned surprise, perfectly pressing a manicured hand to her chest before pulling the ribbon. Inside rested a glossy folder. Patricia opened it, and a loud theatrical gasp escaped her lips. Tears immediately filled her eyes. It was a Mediterranean cruise package. 14 days through Italy and Greece. First-class flights included. I did the math instantly in my head. $15,000 minimum. Probably more during the peak summer season. Patricia stood up and threw her arms around Liam. Chloe clapped her hands, her diamond engagement ring catching the light from the chandelier. The entire table applauded the grand gesture of a successful son taking care of his family. I clapped my hands too, keeping my expression perfectly pleasant. Then Liam turned toward my end of the table. He did not have a gold box for me. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a small foil-covered rectangle. He walked down the length of the table, stopping beside my chair near the kitchen door. He slid a $2 True Fortune scratch-off ticket across the white tablecloth. "Here, Mom, try your luck," he said. He patted my shoulder twice, a quick dismissive gesture, and walked back to his seat. I looked down at the ticket. Silver foil with bold red letters. $2. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand an explanation. I am a retired accounts manager. I do not deal in emotional outbursts. I deal in ledgers. And my internal ledger began reconciling the numbers immediately. 14 months ago, Liam sat at my kitchen table and begged for help. Patricia had insisted that Chloe's wedding be held at the most exclusive country club in the county to keep up appearances with her social circle. Patricia refused to pay for it, claiming her wealth was tied up in complicated trust funds. Liam did not have the money. He was drowning in the pressure of trying to impress a family that viewed him as an ongoing project. He told me it was the most important day of his life. I listened to my son. I went to the bank the next morning. I liquidated my primary retirement emergency fund, $65,000. Money I had saved over 3 decades of early mornings, packed lunches, and skipped vacations. I wrote the check so my son could stand in front of Patricia's friends without feeling ashamed. Now, 14 months later, Patricia received a $15,000 vacation. I received a $2 piece of cardboard bought at a gas station. The disparity was not a mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated ranking of our value in his life. I had funded his entry into this wealthy family, and having secured his place, I was no longer required. I was simply a quiet woman in an old blouse sitting by the kitchen door. I picked up the ticket. "Thank you, Liam," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I slipped the ticket into my worn leather wallet. I picked up my fork and I finished my roasted chicken. I tasted absolutely nothing, but I chewed and swallowed every bite because I refused to let anyone see me break. When the dinner ended, I paid for my own valet parking. I drove home in my 12-year-old sedan, while they piled into Liam's brand new luxury SUV. The drive took exactly 28 minutes. I did not turn on the radio. The silence inside my car felt heavy thick with the realization that my son had fundamentally changed. Or perhaps he had simply revealed who he had always been. I pulled into the driveway of my small single-story ranch house. The mortgage had been paid off for 7 years. The porch light was on, casting a warm yellow glow across the concrete steps. I unlocked the front door, walked inside, and locked it behind me. The house was completely quiet. I hung my coat in the hall closet, placed my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, and walked into the kitchen. I turned on the overhead light. I set my purse on the table, pulled out my wallet, and extracted the $2 scratch-off ticket. I placed it flat on the Formica tabletop. I walked to the jar on the windowsill where I keep loose change. I fished around until I found a quarter. I checked the date out of sheer habit. 1998. The year Liam turned 8 years old. The year I worked overtime all through December to buy him a bicycle he wanted. I sat down at the table. I held the quarter and pressed it against the silver foil of the ticket. I scratched the first row. Nothing. Just random numbers and useless symbols. I scratched the second row. Nothing again. I felt foolish for a moment participating in this meaningless game, scraping away silver dust just to confirm what I already knew. I was holding a worthless piece of paper. I moved the quarter to the third and final row. I scratched the first box. A gold star symbol. I scratched the second box. A second gold star symbol. I dragged the edge of the coin across the final box. A third gold star symbol. 3 matching symbols in a single row. I brushed the silver dust away with my thumb to reveal the prize printed beneath the stars. I stopped breathing. The numbers were printed in bold black ink. $135 million. I did not jump out of my chair. I did not scream or drop the quarter. I simply sat there and stared at the cardboard. I counted the zeros. 6 zeros. $135 million. I took off my glasses, wiped them on my blouse, put them back on, and read it a third time. The numbers did not change. The ink did not move. For exactly 10 minutes, I remained perfectly still. The only sound in the house was the hum of the refrigerator. In those 10 minutes, my entire life reorganized itself. Every financial anxiety, every strict budget, every calculated sacrifice dissolved into the air. But underneath the profound shock of the wealth, something else crystallized. A cold, sharp clarity. My accounting background took over. I flipped the ticket over and read the fine print on the back. Claim instructions. Lottery commission, phone numbers, deadlines. I had 180 days to claim the prize. I walked to the kitchen drawer, took out a clear Ziploc bag, placed the ticket inside, and sealed it tight. Then I walked to the bookshelf in the living room and pulled out my blue ledger. It was a heavy, hardbound book where I tracked every major financial event in my life. I carried it back to the kitchen table. I opened to a fresh page. I picked up my black pen and wrote the date. On the first line, I wrote, "Wedding contribution for Liam minus $65,000. On the second line, I wrote Mother's Day gift from Liam $2 ticket. On the third line, I wrote lottery payout plus $135 million. I looked at the page. If I called Liam right now, if I told him what this ticket was worth, he would be at my front door in 10 minutes. Chloe would suddenly find time to invite me to lunch. Patricia would suddenly treat me as an equal. The apologies would flow, the excuses for his behavior would be perfectly crafted, and the truth of who he really was would be buried under the weight of a 9-figure bank account. I would never know for sure if my son loved me or if he just loved my money. I realized that telling him now would be a mistake. It would erase the stark reality I had witnessed at that dinner table. I closed the ledger. I placed the Ziploc bag containing the ticket inside the pages and put the book back on the shelf. I made a silent vow in my quiet kitchen. I would hide this money. I would not claim it yet. I would not say a word to anyone. I would give Liam and his new family exactly 1 month. 30 days to show me their true colors without the influence of wealth. I wanted to see how they treated a woman they believed was completely financially depleted. I wanted to see what happened when a mother who had given everything had absolutely nothing left to offer. I was no longer a vulnerable retiree at the mercy of an ungrateful son. I was a quiet observer, holding a secret that could destroy their entire world. The clock started ticking, and I was going to watch every single second pass. Tuesday morning arrived with a bitter chill that seeped through the floorboards of my house. I woke up at my usual time, tied my robe tightly around my waist, and walked into the bathroom to start my day. When I turned the shower handle all the way to the left, I expected the familiar rush of comforting heat. Instead, icy water poured from the showerhead, striking the porcelain tub with a hollow, echoing sound. I let it run for 3 full minutes. The temperature never changed. It remained as cold as the winter air outside. I walked down the wooden stairs into the unfinished basement. The culprit was immediately obvious. My water heater, a reliable piece of machinery that had served me well for over 15 years, had finally surrendered. A dark rusted fissure had opened near the base, and a steady pool of water was spreading silently across the gray concrete floor. It was broken beyond repair. I looked at the rusted metal and felt a strange sense of kinship. The machine had given everything it had for years, and now it was completely exhausted. I went back upstairs dressed in a thick sweater and called a local plumbing company I had trusted for a decade. The plumber arrived 2 hours later. He was a kind, quiet man who wiped his boots carefully on the mat before walking through my kitchen. He went down to the basement, inspected the damage, and came back up holding a clipboard. He wrote down a few numbers and handed me the estimate. It would cost $800 for the new unit, the labor, and the disposal of the old tank. I thanked him for his honesty and told him I would call him back shortly to schedule the installation. When he left, I sat alone at my kitchen table and stared at the handwritten estimate. $800. It was a significant amount of money for a retired municipal worker living on a fixed pension. But it was practically nothing compared to the financial sacrifices I had made for my family. My mind immediately went back 14 months ago to the weeks leading up to Liam and Chloe's wedding. Patricia had thrown a massive fit about the floral arrangements. She had insisted that local flowers would make her look cheap in front of her country club friends. She demanded imported white orchids for every table. Liam had come to me frantic and embarrassed, asking for help. I had paid $6,500 just for those orchids. They wilted and were thrown into the garbage 3 days after the reception. I paid that bill without a single complaint because I wanted my son to be happy. Now I needed $800 simply to wash my hands in warm water. I had the money in my checking account. I could have authorized the repair immediately. But my eyes drifted toward the bookshelf in the living room where my blue ledger sat quietly holding a secret worth $135 million. I had promised myself a strict 30-day observation period. I needed to know exactly who my son was without the influence of wealth. This broken water heater presented the perfect opportunity for an audit. I would manufacture a test. I would ask him for a fraction of what I had given him, and I would record his response. I waited until noon to make the call, ensuring he would be on his lunch break. I dialed his number and placed the phone to my ear. It rang 4 times before he picked up. I could hear the faint, rhythmic clicking of a keyboard in the background, signaling his distraction. "Hello, Mom," he said. His voice was brisk, carrying that familiar, impatient tone designed to remind me that his time was highly valuable and mine was not. "Hello, Liam," I said, keeping my tone perfectly mild and maternal. "I am so sorry to interrupt your workday. My water heater completely rusted out this morning. The plumber was just here, and he needs $800 to replace it. I was wondering if you might be able to loan me the money just until my pension check deposits at the end of next week. The clicking of the keyboard stopped instantly. The silence on the line stretched out, followed by a long, heavy sigh that seemed to echo through the receiver. It was a practiced exhalation meant to convey the immense burden of my request. Mom, I really wish you had consulted me before bringing a contractor out there. They always find a way to overcharge people. Look, things are just incredibly tight for us right now. We have a lot of overhead with the house, and Chloe has several charity obligations this month. I simply cannot swing an $800 loan today. I looked at the blank wall above my kitchen sink. Tight finances. The same man who had confidently handed his mother-in-law a $15,000 luxury cruise package just 3 days earlier was telling me that an $800 loan for his own mother was a mathematical impossibility. He was drawing a clear line in the sand regarding my worth. I understand, I said quietly. Can you just put it on a credit card for now? Liam asked, his voice returning to its casual, dismissive cadence. Just use one of those cards with the introductory reward points. You can pay it down over a few months. It really is not that big of a deal. You are right, I replied, my voice devoid of any emotion. I will figure it out. Thank you, Liam. I hung up the phone before he could offer any further financial advice. I did not shed a single tear. I picked up my phone, called the plumber. Back gave him my debit card number and authorized the repair. I spent the rest of the day moving through my house with absolute icy precision. I dusted the shelves. I washed the windows. I slept soundly that night, comforted by the cold, hard facts I had gathered. The true depth of the betrayal did not reveal itself until the following afternoon. I was sitting on my front porch with a cup of hot coffee, slowly scrolling through social media on my tablet. I maintain a quiet profile solely to keep up with former colleagues and distant relatives. As I scrolled, Patricia's profile picture appeared on my feed. She documented every moment of her life to ensure her social circle knew exactly how cherished she was. The newest photograph stopped my hand completely. It was a high-resolution picture of a gleaming stainless steel artisanal espresso machine sitting proudly on Patricia's expansive marble kitchen island. It was a professional-grade appliance, the kind that requires specialized plumbing and imported coffee beans. I recognized the specific brand instantly because Chloe had pointed it out in a luxury catalog several months ago. It cost exactly $1,200. Beneath the photograph, Patricia had written a glowing caption. An early birthday gift from my amazing son-in-law. Liam always knows exactly how to spoil me. Feeling so incredibly blessed today. I set my tablet down on the glass porch table. The coffee in my mug suddenly tasted terribly bitter. I stared out at the street, letting the reality of the image wash over me. This was no longer a simple case of a thoughtless son neglecting his aging mother. This was not a young man who was just disorganized with his personal budget. This was active, deliberate financial cruelty. Liam had explicitly told me over the phone that his finances were too tight to help me secure basic hot water. Yet within 24 hours of that conversation, he had effortlessly purchased a $1,200 coffee maker for a woman who already possessed everything she could ever want. The deficit was glaringly clear. He had the available resources. He had simply calculated the return on investment and decided I was not worth spending them on. As I sat on the porch, analyzing Patricia's photograph, my training as a municipal accounts manager began to whisper in the back of my mind. The numbers were entirely inconsistent. Liam made a respectable corporate salary, but he was not a millionaire. Between the $15,000 Mediterranean cruise, the constant stream of high-end gifts, the country club initiation fees, and the designer espresso machine, his outgoing cash flow was mathematically disproportionate to his actual income. If things were truly tight, as he had claimed on the phone, where was this endless river of money coming from? I walked back into my house and opened my laptop on the dining room table. My son treated me like a naive, aging woman who did not understand the complexities of modern life. He conveniently forgot that I had spent nearly 4 decades tracking municipal funds, auditing massive city budgets, and hunting down hidden financial liabilities. I knew exactly how to find a paper trail. Over 10 years ago, when Liam was just starting his career and looking to buy a sensible starter car, his credit history had been completely non-existent. I had co-signed the auto loan for his Honda Civic to ensure he got a fair interest rate. To facilitate the monthly payments, we had opened a shared credit monitoring portal. I ended up paying off that loan for him 2 years early as a graduation gift. I had never used the portal again, but I knew for a fact that the digital account had never been formally closed or deactivated. I navigated to the financial website. I entered my social security number and carefully typed in my old password. The system paused, then prompted me with a standard security question to verify my identity. "What is your mother's maiden name?" I typed the answer perfectly and hit enter. The digital dashboard loaded immediately. Because my name was still legally linked to his oldest credit file, I had full access to a comprehensive overview of his current financial standing. I clicked on the specific tab for his full credit report. A blue progress bar spun on the screen for 3 agonizing seconds before the detailed document materialized in front of me. I put on my reading glasses, adjusted the brightness on my screen, and began to audit my own son. The very first thing I saw was his overall credit score. It was plummeting rapidly. The bright green numbers I remembered from a year ago had turned a dismal warning shade of dark orange. I scrolled down past the summary to the detailed liability section. My eyes scanned the lines of raw data translating the cold digits into the terrifying reality of his daily life. It was a financial house of cards, and it was swaying violently in the wind. Liam and Chloe had a primary mortgage on their suburban home, which I already knew about. But sitting right beneath that entry was a massive home equity line of credit. They had borrowed against every single penny of equity in their house. The balance was entirely maxed out. They had pulled out tens of thousands of dollars in pure cash, essentially renting the home they proudly claimed to own. I kept scrolling downward. The credit card section was a graveyard of terrible decisions. There were 5 premium platinum cards listed. Every single one of them was hovering at or slightly above the maximum allowable limit. I clicked on the transaction summaries to see exactly where the bleeding was happening. The evidence was staggering and undeniable. There were massive monthly drafts for the exclusive country club Patricia had insisted they join. There were recurring charges for high-end restaurants, designer clothing boutiques, and luxury car leases. The $15,000 Mediterranean cruise was sitting heavy on a card that charged 24% interest. The artisanal espresso machine had been purchased on a retail store credit card that was already flagged in the system for multiple late payments. They were not wealthy. They were drowning in an ocean of debt. I sat back in my chair and took a slow, deep breath, letting the silence of the room settle around me. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with devastating precision. The money I had given Liam for his extravagant wedding had not been a foundation for his new life together with Chloe. It had been his initial entry fee into a social class he had absolutely no business being in. Patricia demanded a lifestyle of constant consumption, luxury, and public display. Liam, desperate for her ongoing approval and terrified of losing his elevated status in Chloe's family, was funding that entire illusion with toxic high-interest debt. He was literally buying their love and respect with money he did not actually have. He told me finances were tight on the phone because they truly were. He refused to loan me $800 because he literally did not have $800 in actual liquid cash in his bank account. He was living his entire life on rotating credit lines. He bought the luxury cruise and the espresso machine on plastic, digging his financial grave deeper every single day, just to keep up appearances for a woman who viewed him as a walking wallet. The tension in my chest tightened not from panic, but from a terrifying crystalline realization. Liam was a ticking financial time bomb. The credit lines would inevitably freeze. The crushing minimum payments would eventually consume his entire monthly paycheck. The wealthy illusion would shatter completely, and Patricia would turn her back on him the very moment the luxury gifts stopped flowing. And when that inevitable collapse finally happened, where would he go? He would come straight to me. He would drive his leased luxury vehicle to my modest, paid-off ranch house. He would sit at this very kitchen table, cry about his terrible mistakes, and beg me to save him from ruin. He viewed me as his ultimate, infinite safety net. He believed that no matter how terribly he treated me, no matter how much he neglected me in favor of Patricia, I would always bail him out. He thought my unconditional love meant unconditional funding. I closed the laptop gently. The screen went dark, reflecting my calm, unsmiling face in the black glass. I looked completely impenetrable. My son had stolen his wedding from my retirement savings. He had traded my dignity for Patricia's shallow affection. He had reduced my entire worth to a $2 piece of foil while secretly funding his own absolute destruction. He expected me to catch him when he inevitably fell. He had no idea that the net was already gone. I stood up and walked slowly over to the bookshelf. I looked at the heavy blue ledger resting on the wood. Inside that book was a quiet secret worth $135 million. It was enough money to pay off his suffocating debts 1,000 times over. It was enough money to buy Patricia's entire country club and turn it into a public parking lot. But I was not going to give him a single dime. I was not going to warn him about the devastating cliff he was driving toward. I was going to sit quietly in the background and watch him drive straight off the edge. He had made his choices at the dinner table. Now he was going to survive the crash all by himself. Silas Thornton operated out of a modest brick building on the quietest edge of the municipal district. During my 38 years managing city accounts, I had learned exactly which lawyers sought the spotlight and which ones preferred the shadows. Silas belonged strictly to the latter category. He did not advertise on highway billboards or television screens. He was a ruthless, old-school architect of estates known exclusively through quiet referrals. His reputation was built entirely on ironclad confidentiality and legal structures so dense they were virtually impenetrable. I parked my 12-year-old sedan in the small private lot behind his office. The morning air was crisp and completely still. I stepped out of the car, adjusting the strap of my heavy leather purse. Inside that purse sat my hardbound blue ledger and a plastic bag containing a piece of cardboard worth $135 million. The waiting room smelled of lemon polish and old paper. A receptionist silently guided me into a large office lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Silas sat behind a massive mahogany desk. He was a man in his late 70s with sharp eyes and hands that never fidgeted. We did not engage in pointless small talk. I appreciated that about him immediately. I sat down in the leather chair across from him, unclasped my purse, and placed the sealed plastic bag precisely in the center of his desk. I told him I needed to claim a lottery prize, and I needed to do it without my name ever touching a public record. Silas put on his writing glasses. He picked up the plastic bag and examined the silver foil and the matching gold stars. He did not gasp or raise his voice. He simply nodded, once opened a thick yellow legal pad, and picked up his fountain pen. He explained that in our state, an individual could claim lottery winnings anonymously by establishing a blind, limited liability company. The company would act as the public face of the wealth shielding my identity from the press, from predatory investment brokers, and most importantly, from my own family. He asked me what I wanted to name the entity. I did not have to think about my answer. I told him to name it Ironwood Holdings. Ironwood is a tree known for having a core so dense and unyielding that it will ruin a careless blade. It felt like the perfect metaphor for the fortress I was currently building around my life. Silas wrote the name down in neat, precise script. Then we moved to the actual distribution of the wealth. I opened my blue ledger and turned to the pages I had prepared the night before. I did not want this money sitting idle in a vault. I wanted it working for people who actually understood the value of a dollar. I instructed Silas to draft a series of irrevocable charitable trusts. The very first trust was heavily funded to support local trade schools and vocational training programs. My son Liam had used my life savings to buy his way into a country club where men paid thousands of dollars just to play golf. I was going to use my money to buy tools and tuition for young men and women who actually wanted to work with their hands and build real futures. Next, I directed millions of dollars toward 2 regional children's hospitals to cover the medical debts of families who were drowning in bills they could not afford. I also established a massive endowment for a network of community centers that provided after-school care for children of single mothers. I had been a single mother once, working late hours just to keep the lights on, and I knew exactly what that kind of exhaustion felt like. I dictated these terms to Silas with the clinical precision of a municipal auditor allocating a city budget. Every dollar had a purpose. Every trust had a strict oversight committee. Silas wrote continuously for over an hour. When he finally put his pen down, he looked at me over the rim of his glasses. He noted that I had directed vast sums of wealth to strangers, but I had not established a single provision for my family. He asked me directly if I wanted to set up a discreet trust fund for my son or my future grandchildren. I looked at him with absolute calm. I told Silas to leave my son completely off every single document. I instructed him to draft my personal will with explicitly punitive language, ensuring that if Liam ever attempted to contest the estate, he would be legally barred from receiving even a single cent. Silas did not argue or ask for the emotional reasoning behind my choice. He simply nodded and noted the exclusion. Sitting in that quiet office watching the lawyer finalize the paperwork, the tension in my chest felt entirely different than it had before. It was not the tight, suffocating grip of financial anxiety. It was the powerful, silent hum of absolute control. I was building a massive fortress of wealth right under my son's nose, and he had absolutely no idea that the heavy iron gate was already locked against him. The next morning, I woke up early to begin the second phase of my plan. Securing the money was only half the battle. The other half was meticulously severing the legal and financial arteries that still connected me to my son. I drove to the local bank branch right when the glass doors unlocked. I sat down with a personal banker and asked to close a joint savings account that Liam and I had shared since he was a freshman in college. It was a leftover artifact from a time when I managed his tuition transfers and textbook money. The account only held about $400 now, but the money was irrelevant. The legal connection was the liability. The banker clicked her mouse a few times and processed the closure. She handed me a cashier's check for the remaining balance. As she finalized the transaction, I knew an automated banking alert was instantly generated and sent directly to Liam's phone. From the bank, I drove straight to the administrative offices of my primary care physician and the local hospital network. Years ago, when Liam first became an adult, I had proudly listed him as my primary emergency contact and signed a legal medical proxy, granting him authority to make healthcare decisions for me if I ever became incapacitated. At the time, it felt like a beautiful milestone, a mother trusting her grown son to care for her in her twilight years. Now it felt like leaving a loaded weapon in the hands of a desperate stranger. I sat at the reception desk and filled out fresh paperwork. I formally removed Liam's name and contact information from every single medical file. I legally revoked his status as my healthcare proxy, stripping him of any future authority over my physical well-being. I replaced him with a trusted former colleague from the municipal office, a woman who actually checked on me and possessed a strong moral compass. I was systematically untangling myself from Liam's life, erasing his legal footprint from my existence with the cold efficiency of a surgeon removing a hazardous tumor. When I returned home and walked into my kitchen, my cell phone vibrated on the counter. It was a text message from Liam. The automated notification from the bank had reached him just as I anticipated. I opened the message and read his words. Mom, I just got an email that our old college savings account was closed. Why are you messing with the paperwork right now? Did something happen? I stared at the glowing screen. His tone was entirely predictable. He was annoyed by the inconvenience of the notification. He felt entitled to an explanation for why I was altering a financial account that had my own money in it. He was drowning in toxic debt, frantically trying to balance maxed-out credit cards and a massive home equity line of credit and yet he still felt he had the right to monitor and manage my small actions. I placed my hands flat on the kitchen counter and took a steadying breath. I could have told him exactly why I closed the account. I could have told him about the credit report I pulled, about the staggering debt I uncovered, about the absolute disgust I felt when he bought Patricia a luxury espresso machine 24 hours after telling me he could not afford to help me fix my broken water heater. I could have shattered his entire arrogant facade with one aggressive phone call. Instead, I maintained my absolute poker face. I picked up the phone and carefully typed my reply. Nothing happened, Liam. I am just getting my affairs in order for my old age. Simplifying my paperwork so you do not have to worry about it later. I hit send and placed the phone back on the counter. I waited. 3 minutes later, the screen lit up with his response. That makes sense. It is good to be organized. Thanks for being so responsible, Mom. Have a good week. I read his reply and a cold, quiet smile spread across my face. It was the perfect response from a man completely blinded by his own arrogance. He praised me for being responsible, totally oblivious to the fact that my responsibility was aimed entirely at protecting myself from him. He read my message about getting my affairs in order and assumed I was preparing for a quiet, frugal decline. He heard the words old age and imagined a helpless woman clearing away clutter to make his future inheritance process slightly more convenient. He was entirely missing the subtext. He was so focused on keeping up appearances for Patricia and managing his own disastrous financial illusions that he could not see the reality standing right in front of him. I was not simplifying my paperwork for his convenience. I was actively and deliberately isolating him from an empire he would never be permitted to touch. The legal arteries were officially cut. The financial walls were fully erected. The blind trust was secured, and the charities were funded. I had successfully transformed myself from a vulnerable target into an untouchable ghost, and my son was standing alone in the dark, praising me for turning off the lights. The financial collapse of my son arrived on a completely ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen table organizing my garden seed catalogs for the upcoming spring planting when a loud, aggressive knock echoed from my front door. It was not the polite, measured knock of a delivery driver or a neighbor. It was the frantic, heavy pounding of someone who believed their urgency should dictate the pace of my entire life. I stood up, smoothed the front of my slacks, and walked to the entryway. When I opened the door, I found Liam and Chloe standing on my porch. They had not called. They had not asked if I was available. They simply pushed past me into the hallway the second the door swung wide enough to allow them access. Liam looked entirely different from the polished, confident man who had handed his mother-in-law a luxury cruise a month prior. His designer shirt was wrinkled. The skin around his eyes was tight and shadowed with exhaustion. Chloe followed closely behind him, clutching a highly expensive designer handbag like a shield. Her face was set in a hard, defensive expression. Without waiting for an invitation, Liam marched directly into my kitchen and dropped a thick, heavily stapled stack of legal documents onto the center of my table. The papers landed with a dull, heavy thud right on top of my seed catalogs. "We need to talk, Mom," Liam said. His voice was breathless, strung tight with a panic he was desperately trying to disguise as masculine authority. "We have a family emergency and we need to handle it right now." I did not offer them a seat. I did not offer them a beverage. I stood at the edge of the kitchen counter and looked at the stack of papers. "What kind of emergency?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Liam ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he had possessed since childhood. "The market is shifting," he began, launching into a clearly rehearsed corporate pitch. "The economy is getting unpredictable. Chloe and I have been reviewing our long-term portfolio, and we realized we have a massive liquidity problem. We need to restructure our assets immediately to protect our investments and secure a stable environment for our future children." He was using corporate buzzwords to avoid saying the word debt. He was trying to sound like a savvy investor making a strategic move, rather than a man whose maxed-out credit cards and drained home equity line of credit were finally suffocating him. And how exactly do your liquidity problems involve my kitchen table? I asked. Liam pointed a shaking finger at the thick stack of documents. Those are reverse mortgage applications. I have already spoken to a broker who specializes in fast approvals. Your house is completely paid off. It is just sitting here accumulating dead equity. You do not need all of this trapped capital. We do. If you sign these papers, the bank will release a lump sum of cash against the value of your house. It will be more than enough to clear our temporary restructuring hurdles. I looked at my son. He was standing in the home I had paid for with 30 years of municipal accounting work demanding that I sign away the very roof over my head to pay for his country club memberships and his mother-in-law's artisanal espresso machines. I am retired, Liam, I said calmly. A reverse mortgage drains the equity of the property and leaves a massive loan balance. Why would I jeopardize my only shelter to pay for your expenses? Because you are my mother. His voice spiked, the polished corporate facade cracking to reveal the terrified boy underneath. You are supposed to help us. If we do not get this cash injection by the end of the month, we are going to lose our house. We will be completely ruined. We will have to declare bankruptcy and move across the country to find cheaper jobs in a cheaper state. If we leave, you will never see us again. You will never get to see your future grandchildren. You will be completely alone here. It was a blatant, ugly extortion attempt. He was holding my hypothetical grandchildren hostage to force me to hand over the absolute last asset I possessed. He was willing to strip me of my financial independence and leave me burdened with a predatory mortgage just so he could maintain his wealthy illusion for Patricia a little while longer. Before I could respond, Chloe stepped forward, placing her manicured hands flat on my table. Honestly, Evelyn, you are being incredibly selfish right now, she said, her voice dripping with pure condescension. You live alone in this house. You do not need all this space anyway. Families are supposed to make sacrifices for each other. My mother Patricia sacrifices for us constantly. She gives us her time, her wisdom, her emotional support. She is always investing in our family. The least you can do is sign a piece of paper so your own son does not lose his home. I stared at Chloe. The sheer blinding audacity of her statement hung in the air like smoke. Patricia sacrificed absolutely nothing. Patricia extracted. Patricia consumed. Liam had drained his own home equity to fund Patricia's lavish lifestyle, and now Chloe was standing in my kitchen weaponizing my maternal guilt, demanding that I sacrifice my home to pay for her mother's luxury gifts. I looked down at the reverse mortgage documents. I read the cover sheet. The interest rates listed on the broker agreement were predatory. The terms were completely parasitic. If I signed these papers, the bank would slowly devour my home, and I would be left with nothing but a closing statement and a mountain of compounding interest. Liam was willing to feed me to the wolves just to buy himself a few more months of pretending to be rich. The tension in the kitchen was suffocating. Liam was breathing heavily, waiting for me to break. He expected me to cry. He expected me to panic at the threat of him moving away. He expected the old Evelyn, the woman who had surrendered her $65,000 retirement fund simply because he asked for a nice wedding. I did not argue with them. I did not raise my voice or kick them out of my house. I remained completely composed. I reached out and pulled the thick stack of reverse mortgage documents toward me. I adjusted my reading glasses and slowly flipped through the first few pages, mimicking the posture of an overwhelmed but compliant mother. I allowed a heavy silence to fill the room, letting Liam sweat while I pretended to consider his devastating demand. You are asking me to leverage my entire future, I said softly, keeping my eyes fixed on the contract. This is a highly complex financial instrument. It requires a serious conversation. It is not something I'm going to sign while standing at a kitchen counter on a Tuesday afternoon. Liam stepped forward, his eyes wide with a desperate, hungry hope. He thought I was giving in. He thought my hesitation was just a prelude to my surrender. We can explain it all to you, Mom, he said quickly, his voice smoothing out into a reassuring purr. I can walk you through the numbers. It is incredibly safe. You get to stay in the house and we get the cash we need to survive. It is a win for everyone. I promise you I will pay the loan balance back as soon as my quarterly bonuses come through next year. I looked up from the papers and met my son's eyes. I knew for an absolute fact that he had no quarterly bonuses coming. I had read his credit report. I knew his entire life was a fiscal crater. I also knew that calling him a liar right now would ruin the architecture of the trap I had spent the last month building. I will not discuss this here, I said firmly. If we are going to restructure our entire family economy, we are going to do it properly. We are going to sit down like adults and review the numbers together. Liam nodded eagerly. Okay, whatever you want. When? We can do it tomorrow. No, I replied. We will do it this weekend. I want you to book the private dining room at the Oak Room Steakhouse for Saturday evening. The same room where we celebrated Father's Day. Chloe crossed her arms, rolling her eyes in annoyance. Evelyn, we do not have money for fancy steakhouses right now. We just told you we are facing a liquidity crisis. I will pay for the dinner, I said smoothly. I have some funds set aside for special occasions. But I have one absolute condition. Patricia must be there. Liam blinked, entirely confused by the demand. Patricia, why does my mother-in-law need to be there? Because I said, adopting a tone of profound gravity. Chloe just reminded me how much Patricia invests in this family. If we are making massive decisions about the future of your household and the stability of your marriage, all the stakeholders need to be present. Family finances require everyone at the table. We will finalize the financial arrangements for your future on Saturday. Bring these documents with you. Liam stared at me for a moment, his mind racing to process the scenario. His vanity and his greed quickly overtook his confusion. He heard the phrase finalize the financial arrangements and translated it into a guaranteed victory. He believed I had accepted the defeat. He believed that inviting Patricia was just my pathetic attempt to save face and seek validation from his wealthy mother-in-law while handing over my life savings. He smiled. It was a massive, relieved, triumphant smile that made my stomach turn. You are doing the right thing, Mom, Liam said, stepping forward to pat my shoulder exactly as he had done when he handed me the $2 scratch-off ticket. I will make the reservation today. 7 o'clock at the Oak Room. We will bring the papers. Thank you. You will not regret this. Chloe offered a tight, victorious smirk. See, Evelyn, she said lightly. We knew you would understand once we explained the reality of the situation. Family always comes through. They turned and walked out of my house, leaving the heavy reverse mortgage application sitting on my kitchen table. I listened to the front door close. I listened to the engine of their luxury SUV start in the driveway. I walked to the window and watched them pull away, speeding down the street toward a home they technically no longer owned. They were elated. They thought they had successfully bullied a vulnerable widow into handing over the last piece of her financial security. They thought they had won the war. I walked back to the kitchen table. I picked up the reverse mortgage documents. I carried them into the living room and placed them squarely on the bookshelf, resting them directly beneath the hardbound blue ledger and the sealed Ziploc bag. My son had walked directly into a perfectly orchestrated slaughter, completely blinded by his own entitlement. He was going to bring his wife, his predatory mother-in-law, and a pen to a high-end steakhouse expecting me to sign away my home. He had absolutely no idea that I had already claimed $135 million. He had no idea that I had already met with a ruthless estate attorney. He had no idea that my final financial arrangements involved burning his entire fake empire right in front of the woman he had bankrupted himself to impress. I locked my front door. I turned off the kitchen light. I had 4 days to prepare for Saturday evening, and my composure was absolute. The private dining room at the Oak Room Steakhouse was cloaked in dark wood and dim lighting. I arrived 40 minutes early. I took the seat at the very head of the long table. For my entire life, I had allowed myself to be seated near the kitchen doors at the margins of family gatherings, making myself small so others could feel large. Tonight, I claimed the center. Silas Thornton arrived precisely 15 minutes later. He wore a charcoal suit and carried a slim leather briefcase. He sat directly to my right. He did not order a drink. He simply folded his hands on the table and waited. Liam, Chloe, and Patricia arrived exactly 10 minutes late. It was a calculated delay, a power play designed by Patricia to ensure she made an entrance. She swept into the room, draped in heavy gold jewelry, carrying a flute of champagne she had brought from the main bar. She looked at me with a tight, patronizing smile. She looked at Silas with mild confusion, but did not bother to introduce herself. She took the seat at the opposite end of the table, treating the space as her personal throne room. Chloe sat down and immediately began complaining about the valet service. Liam took the seat to my left. He carried a thick manila folder and a silver pen. He was practically vibrating with nervous energy. He thought he was minutes away from securing the cash injection he needed to survive. He thought this dinner was a mere formality. He did not look at my face. He only looked at the empty space on the table where he intended to place the reverse mortgage documents. If you are listening to this story right now, and you have ever watched someone smile at you while planning your ruin, let me know what state you are watching from in the comments. I want to know who is sitting in this room with me. Patricia tapped her manicured fingernails against her champagne glass. Evelyn, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Liam tells me you are finally making some sensible decisions regarding your property. I always say there is no sense in an older woman rattling around in a house that is too big for her. It is so much better to liquidate the asset and help the younger generation build their wealth. You are doing the right thing. I looked at Patricia. I did not smile. I did not nod. I simply let her words hang in the silent air. Liam cleared his throat. He opened his manila folder and slid the thick stack of reverse mortgage applications across the polished wood. He placed the silver pen deliberately on top of the signature line. All right, Mom, he said, his voice straining to sound casual. I have highlighted all the areas that need your signature. Once we get this notarized on Monday, the bank will release the equity funds to you and we can restructure our family portfolios. It is a win for everybody. I did not touch the silver pen. I did not touch the legal documents. Instead, I reached into my heavy leather purse and pulled out my hardbound blue ledger. I set it squarely on the table. The dark blue cover stood out against the white linen tablecloth. I opened the book to the fresh page I had written on earlier that week. I adjusted my reading glasses. The room fell perfectly silent. What is that? Chloe asked, her tone sharp and suddenly defensive. This is an audit, I said. My voice was calm, clinical, and completely devoid of emotion. I spent 38 years managing municipal accounts. I track liabilities. I track expenditures. And tonight, I am reconciling the deficit in this family. Liam frowned. Mom, what are you talking about? Just sign the papers and we can order dinner. I looked down at my ledger. 14 months ago, I said, reading the exact numbers, I liquidated my primary retirement emergency fund. $65,000. I gave every single cent of that money to you, Liam, so you could pay for a country club wedding that Patricia demanded. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her champagne glass pausing halfway to her mouth. 5 days ago, I continued. My water heater failed entirely. It cost $800 to replace. I called my son and asked for a temporary loan to cover the repair until my pension cleared. My son told me his finances were far too tight. He told me to put the repair on a high-interest credit card. He claimed he simply could not afford to help his own mother secure hot water. The dining room was dead quiet. I turned the page of my ledger. 24 hours later, Patricia posted a photograph of a brand new artisanal espresso machine on social media. The cost of that machine was $1,200. The caption stated it was a gift from Liam. Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. I did not raise my voice, but the sheer authority in the gesture silenced her instantly. 2 months ago on Father's Day, I said, looking directly at Patricia, Liam presented you with a luxury Mediterranean cruise package. The minimum cost of that trip was $15,000. On that exact same evening, my son handed me a $2 gas station scratch-off ticket. I closed the ledger. Liam stared at me, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "Mom, you are embarrassing us," he hissed, leaning forward. "This is none of your business. We brought you here to handle the house paperwork. Stop creating drama over a coffee maker." "But it is my business, Liam," I said smoothly. "Because your finances are not just tight. You are completely bankrupt." Patricia let out a sharp gasp. I kept my eyes locked on Liam. "Since my name is still tied to your oldest auto loan, I pulled your comprehensive credit report on Wednesday afternoon," I explained. I read the entire file. "You have secretly taken out a massive home equity line of credit on your house. It is entirely maxed out. You have 5 premium credit cards hovering at their maximum limits. You are funding country club memberships, luxury car leases, and $15,000 vacations on revolving debt with 24% interest rates." Patricia turned to look at Liam. The patronizing smile was entirely gone from her face. It was replaced by a look of absolute calculating horror. "Liam, what is she talking about?" Patricia demanded, her voice tight and brittle. Liam began to stammer. His polished facade shattered into a million pieces. He looked at his mother-in-law, then at his wife, desperate to regain control of the narrative. "Mom J, it is just a temporary cash flow issue. The market is slow right now. That is why Mom is signing the house equity over to us tonight. It will clear everything up." I placed both of my hands flat on the table. "I am not signing anything," I said. "I will not hand over my home, so you can continue to buy the affection of a woman who will drop you the second she realizes your bank accounts are empty. I will not let you use my life savings to purchase a social status you cannot actually afford." Patricia slammed her champagne flute down on the table. The liquid spilled over the rim. She glared at Liam with pure disgust. "You are broke," she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "You bought me a vacation on credit while begging your mother for her house. You are pathetic." Liam looked like he was going to be sick. The extortion had failed. The debt was exposed. The wealthy mother-in-law he had worshipped was currently staring at him as if he were something repulsive she had scraped off her shoe. But the audit was not finished. I reached into my purse one last time. I brought out the clear plastic Ziploc bag. Inside the bag was the silver foil-covered cardboard of the True Fortune scratch-off ticket. I placed it squarely on top of the unsigned reverse mortgage documents. Liam stared at the ticket. His hands were visibly shaking. He did not understand why I was bringing a piece of garbage to the table. "You told me to try my luck," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying quiet. "You told me my worth in your life was exactly $2. You expected me to quietly accept that valuation while you poured thousands of dollars into a family that views you as an ongoing financial project." I tapped the plastic bag with my index finger. "I went home that night. I sat at my kitchen table, and I scratched this ticket. I matched 3 gold stars on the 3rd row." Chloe leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she tried to read the tiny print through the plastic bag. "What did you win?" she asked, her tone entirely devoid of its previous arrogance. I turned to Silas Thornton. The attorney silently opened his leather briefcase. He extracted a single heavy sheet of paper bearing the official seal of the State Lottery Commission. The personal identifying details had been legally redacted, but the financial figures were printed in bold, undeniable black ink. Silas placed the document directly in front of Liam. Liam looked down at the paper. I watched his eyes track the numbers. I watched the blood drain entirely from his face, leaving him a pale, hollow shell of a man. His mouth opened, but he could not produce a single sound. $135 million. Silas stated, his deep voice filling the quiet dining room. Claimed and secured by a blind trust under the sole authority of my client. Chloe let out a sound that was half shriek, half sob. Patricia sat frozen, her jaw literally dropping as the magnitude of the wealth registered in her status-obsessed mind. Liam looked up at me. His eyes were wide with a frantic, desperate realization. The mother he had dismissed, the woman he had tried to leave homeless just to cover his credit card bills, was sitting across from him, possessing more wealth than he could earn in 10 lifetimes. "Mom!" Liam choked out, his voice cracking violently. "Mom, we can fix this. I am so sorry. I was just stressed. I was just trying to keep my family afloat. Please, you have to help me. I am your son." I looked at him with absolute composure. I felt no pity. I felt no anger. I felt only the clean, cold closure of a ledger finally balancing to zero. "I did not need the money to know what I was worth to you, Liam," I said. "I just needed it to show you what your greed cost you." I turned to Silas, granting him the floor. The attorney adjusted his glasses and looked at the terrified couple. "Mrs. Hayes has established a series of irrevocable trusts," Silas explained with clinical detachment. "The capital has already been legally distributed. $2 million will fund vocational scholarships for local trade schools. $4 million will be placed in an endowment for the Regional Children's Hospital. Another substantial portion will establish a foundation for community centers supporting single mothers. The remaining wealth is secured in a private holding company. You are explicitly excluded from every single document. You will receive absolutely nothing." Liam slumped back in his chair as if he had been physically struck. Chloe buried her face in her hands, sobbing openly as her wealthy suburban fantasy evaporated into thin air. Patricia was staring at Liam with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. He was no longer her successful, generous son-in-law. He was a bankrupt fraud who had just cost her access to a 9-figure fortune by treating his own mother like garbage. I stood up from the head of the table. I picked up my blue ledger and my leather purse. I pulled 4 crisp $100 bills from my wallet and dropped them onto the white tablecloth to cover the cost of the uneaten dinner. "I suggest you start packing, Liam," I said, looking down at him one final time. "The bank is going to want their house back soon, and I hear apartments are very expensive right now. You should probably return that espresso machine while you still have the receipt." I did not wait for his response. I did not look at Chloe's tears or Patricia's furious glare. I turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the private dining room. Silas Thornton closed his briefcase with a sharp click and followed quietly behind me. We walked out of the restaurant and into the cool evening air. I left my son sitting at that table, completely trapped between his suffocating debt and the wrath of his mother-in-law. I had paid for his wedding. I had watched him give her a luxury cruise, but the final cost of his betrayal was entirely his own to bear. I handed my valet ticket to the attendant. I stepped into my 12-year-old sedan. The engine turned over with a steady, reliable hum. I drove away from the restaurant, leaving the wreckage of my son's entitlement far behind me, heading toward a future that belonged to no one else but me. The collapse of my son's financial illusion did not happen overnight. It happened the way a dilapidated building finally surrenders to gravity. Slowly at first, and then all at once with a deafening crash. Without my home equity to plug the gaping holes in his credit history, Liam's massive mountain of debt finally caught up to him. The premium platinum credit cards were frozen one by one as the missed payments piled up. The high-interest home equity loans ballooned far beyond his ability to make even the minimum monthly contributions. Within 3 short months of our devastating dinner at the Oak Room Steakhouse, the bank initiated aggressive foreclosure proceedings on their beautiful suburban home. I did not stay to watch the disaster unfold in person. I did not need to see it. In a city connected by tight social circles and quiet gossip, the news traveled incredibly fast. Liam and Chloe were forced to pack their designer clothes and expensive shoes into cheap cardboard boxes. They had to move out of the neighborhood before the bank officially seized the property and locked the doors. They had absolutely nowhere to go. They naturally assumed Patricia would take them in. After all, Liam had completely bankrupted himself trying to impress her and fund her lavish lifestyle. But Patricia was a woman whose maternal affection was entirely conditional upon the optics of financial success. The exact moment Liam's poverty became public knowledge, everything changed. The moment he became a social embarrassment rather than a trophy son-in-law, Patricia completely cut them off. She stopped returning their frantic phone calls. She revoked Chloe's access to the elite country club. She erased them from her social calendar as easily as wiping a dirty smudge from a crystal glass. Liam was left with absolutely nothing. He was entirely abandoned by the very people he had sacrificed his own mother to please. He had traded my unconditional support for a wealthy illusion, and the illusion had finally evaporated. I did not linger in the city to witness the aftermath of his terrible choices. My work there was permanently finished. I contacted a highly recommended real estate agent and listed my small ranch house for immediate sale. The property sold in less than a week to a lovely young couple looking to start their first family. I packed my practical clothes, my heavy blue ledger, and a few deeply meaningful photographs. I left all the old furniture and bad memories behind. I deliberately did not leave a forwarding address with the local post office. I changed my cellular phone number. I completely severed the final invisible threads that tethered me to my past life. For 38 years, I had lived exactly where people expected me to live. I had done exactly what people expected me to do. Now I was finally claiming the absolute right to simply vanish into my own hard-earned happiness. I purchased a sprawling property on the coast hundreds of miles away from the heavy expectations of my previous existence. It is a stunning, quiet house, sitting securely on a high, rocky bluff that overlooks the ocean. The architecture is sturdy and classic, built from heavy timber to withstand the coastal weather. It features massive glass windows that let in the brilliant morning light. It boasts a wide wraparound porch where you can sit and hear the powerful waves crashing against the stone cliffs below. It is the kind of house that breathes with you. It is a place where the air always tastes like salt water and pure freedom. I did not keep the massive fortune completely to myself. Silas Thornton executed the charitable trusts exactly as I had instructed in his quiet office. The local trade schools received their heavy scholarships, giving young workers the tools they needed to build honest careers. The regional children's hospitals cleared their outstanding patient debts, freeing terrified parents from the crushing weight of medical bankruptcy. And the municipal library, where I used to spend my quiet lunch breaks, received a massive, entirely anonymous donation. They used the funds to build an entirely new wing dedicated strictly to adult literacy and community education. I saw a colorful picture of the grand opening in a digital newspaper article. The city mayor cut a bright red ribbon. The library director gave a beautiful, tearful speech, thanking their secret benefactor for changing the future of the community. I smiled at the computer screen, closed the browser window, and went back to looking at the endless blue ocean. It was a highly satisfactory investment. The money was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. My mornings now are completely peaceful and beautifully predictable. I do not wake up to the harsh sound of loud alarm clocks or frantic text messages demanding my money or my time. I wake up naturally when the sun rises over the water. I walk into my spacious kitchen and make a pot of strong, dark coffee. I step out onto my wraparound porch and sit in a comfortable wooden rocking chair. I wear a thick, warm sweater against the crisp morning chill, and I watch the tide roll in from the horizon. Inside my house in a quiet study, lined with heavy bookshelves, my blue ledger rests on a solid oak desk. Right next to the ledger sits a small, elegant wooden frame. It does not hold a photograph of a country club wedding I paid for. It does not hold a picture of a family that viewed me as a useless inconvenience. Inside the frame sits a $2 silver foil scratch-off ticket. The 3 matching gold stars are clearly visible through the glass. I framed the lottery ticket not as a symbol of the massive wealth I claimed. The money is incredibly wonderful, and it is ultimately just math. I framed that small piece of cardboard as a monument to the exact moment my life truly changed. It is a daily reminder of the night I finally opened my eyes to the truth. The night I finally audited my own worth. The night I permanently stopped paying for people who absolutely refused to value me. I take a slow sip of my coffee from a simple ceramic mug. The hot liquid warms my hands. The steady ocean breeze brushes gently against my face. The beautiful house behind me is completely silent. For the very first time in my entire life, the silence does not feel like loneliness or isolation. It feels like pure, absolute, unbothered tranquility. The heavy ledger is finally balanced. The emotional debt is permanently cleared. The rest of my future belongs entirely to me.